Hi, good morning, everyone. I can see quite a few people are starting to join. So as I normally do, I'll just kind of start talking here a little bit. The presentation hasn't actually started yet, but I know it's useful to have someone to be able to hear. You can actually hear things and presumably see stuff as well. So you should be able to see the screen, which is just the basic first page of my presentation. And hopefully you can see me, you can hear me as well. I make it about 29 minutes past, but we'll give it a few minutes anyway. Let everyone have a chance to join. If you can keep your system, your microphones on mute, and feel free to turn your cameras off. It's entirely up to you. I can see Jeanette now is looking at the screen saying, "How do I turn this camera off?" Sorry, Joe, I wasn't picking on you. You were just the only one who does have a camera on at the minute, but feel free to leave it on. But yeah, you can click it off if you want. There you go. You're all gone. Yeah, welcome. It's a pretty miserable day. I guess it is where most of you are. It's certainly it's miserable where I am, just outside Scunthorpe. It's been chucking it down all morning. I got soaking wet going out to walk the dog this morning, and it hasn't really improved since then. Yeah, so we're going to talk this morning about patient online access. Hopefully you guys all have or know about it, or are pretty much on the way to being totally ready. I'll talk about the different stages in a moment, and predominantly what I'm going to go through is the NHS Digital check sheet that they provided. So we'll just talk through that, and a couple of little things that have come up. So a couple of specific questions that I've had from practices over the past couple of weeks. As you know, there's been a lot of discussion around this. It's been hasn't quite been in the national press. It's been obviously in the health service press and journal and the Pulse and all these sort of health related news outlets have been covering it quite extensively, as you'd expect. But there hasn't been much wider than that. I know I've not seen anything on national news, a fair bit on Twitter, but again, just at health level, if you like. And I get the impression that NHS England are going to do a fairly low-key launch of the programme. To some extent, they've already done that. Obviously, some of you will have the system already live anyway from the 1st of November. And I think that's a reflection of a number of things. I'm sure NHS England are aware of the sensitivity of the programme. And the resource and how much resource is taken from you guys in primary care at a time when you're all incredibly busy as well. So I think they are very aware of that, and so there's not going to be a big publicity launch around this. I don't expect. It'll just be it's there now, and people are able to use it. So okay, 32 minutes past. As I say, if you can all keep your systems on, your microphones on mute, that'd be great. As I say, you can turn your cameras off. It's entirely up to you. I know sometimes you get a better connection by having the camera off. And if you can go onto mute as a second, just hear some feedback from someone there. If you can make sure your microphone's on mute, that would be great. Okay, well, hopefully you can all, let me just move that out of the way, see the presentation. It is the 15th of November 2022, and we'll make a start. If you want to ask questions as we go through, if you put them into the chat, I've got one of my colleagues, Amanda, who can look at that and can probably interrupt me if there's anything as we go along that you really feel you need to talk about at that time. And I will pause a couple of times as we go through this. So please feel free just to bring yourself off mute and to ask a question. If not, save them to the end, and we'll do questions at the end as well. But if there's anything as we go through this, please just shout out. So it's a nice blank screen. There we go. Access to patient online records. This is what we're talking about this morning. I'm not interrupting or doing anything else, as I sometimes have been known to do. We're just going to do this. It'll probably take, I think, 20 minutes, half an hour perhaps to run through this. So what's the basic concept here then? This is what the program's called for the specific NHS bit, and you have heard it called a number of different things. It doesn't it doesn't seem to have a single name. They call it different things at different times, but essentially this is the main one: patient access for patients to their online records. It's part of a bigger program, which I have heard mentioned a few times, which is about citizens' access to government services. So it's part of that, and you certainly hear this citizen access terminology being used. And what is it? Essentially, it is, as it says there, for patients to have access predominantly through the NHS app, but we'll talk about that as well, because there are other routes that this can work. So the current position then, following all the discussions at the end of October and coming into November, which I'm not going to go over, the situation, and I have to say this is, as I understand it, from having read the various different bits of information that have come out, is that if your practice was one of those that informed their clinical system supplier that you wanted to pause and that you weren't ready to go live with this at the beginning of November when it was originally scheduled, then your clinical system supplier won't have activated your site, and you will have this about a 4-week period to do the final preparations, but it will be activated on the 30th of November. So this is the period of time you've got. You said you weren't ready on the 1st of November, therefore you've been given this extra period of time to get ready, essentially, and it will go live on the 30th of November. For those who didn't inform their clinical system supplier, your system is presumably live now. In the documentation, it talks about the clinical system suppliers will have gone through their planned activation processes, and therefore it should be working for you and obviously for your patients, probably from the 1st of November, if not very soon afterwards. I'm not entirely sure how they've switched practices on, whether they do so many in a batch at a time or not. But essentially, you can expect that you either will be, or you either are, or you will be switched on in the imminent future, and therefore your patients will have access to the information. Remember, again, a couple of fundamental points here. It's only information that you enter from now going forward that patients will see on their online system, unless they already have access to the historical information, which is a different concept. So patients could have asked now to have access to their online record, and they would see that history. But what this is only about information that's entered from now, or from the date in which essentially your system is switched on, going forward, and that information being available. Okay, so that's the current position as I understand it. So what is it then? It's default access for patients to the full GP record. So that's everything in it: the letters, documents, obviously all the stuff that you see within the GP record. One of the best ways that you guys can kind of follow and understand this, I think, and that we can all get a grip of it, is either to have it activated for yourself. So I presume most of you've got the NHS app. Have a look and see what you think it's what it's going to look like. But also you can set up a test patient, and you can set up a test patient in the system, and there are some links at the end to the NHS digital pages where it describes how to set up a test patient at your practice, so you'll actually see what they can see. And I think that's probably a really useful thing to do. I'm not a clinical system user like you're ahead of me already. I don't use System 1, I don't use EMIS Web, so I'm at a disadvantage in terms of trying to describe what the system will look like and what I'm going to see. I know what I've seen when I look on my NHS app, but actually I think it'd be really useful for you guys to have a look at this test patient, and then you'll have that actual view of what patients are going to see. But as far as I'm aware, it's the full GP record. What it isn't are messages, the internal messaging system that I know System 1 has, I guess EMIS Web has as well. It's not that. And the other thing which I was trying to find out yesterday when I was writing this presentation, which I couldn't find, was about alerts and flags, because I don't think it includes them as those as well. Certainly there was a question about how they transfer when you move from one practice to another, that alerts and flags may not transfer, but I'm still trying to, that's one of the slightly small outstanding queries that I've still got. So it's default access of full GP record. There's something I was going to say about that. Yeah, it is just the GP bit. So questions raised around System 1 because of the way it operates, it is only the GP record that the patient will have the view of. So even if you have a patient where you can see they have other System 1 access, System 1 units with data in it, the patient won't see that. The patient has only seen the GP record. Now, this came up the other day at one of the out-of-hours services, which is run where essentially the patient has seen a GP at an out-of-hours service. And it was just the other day, and when they'd gone to look on their app, it didn't show that. So although it's a GP service, they're not seeing that information because it's a separate System 1 unit. They're only seeing their registered GP practice record. Okay. Let's have a look. Yeah, as well as the NHS app, other online systems. So I know System 1 has a System 1 Online. It's probably called something else, isn't it? But you know, I mean, and EMIS has its own online system as well and its own app. Data will be available through those as well. Predominantly, the NHS wants us to use the NHS app, and actually it makes your life easier because patients can set up the NHS app themselves. Whereas I think I'm right in saying that the System 1 and the EMIS apps have to be set up with access through the practice. I think the NHS would prefer people use the NHS app, but the data is available through others as well. Yeah, you guys know all the stuff about why it's being done, contractual obligation and so on. So where does it sit in terms of subject access requests? Essentially, what you're doing is, and it can be, I think we can make this connection that essentially you're giving someone an online real-time subject access request. So it's important to remember a subject access request is a formal legal process. It's described in the Data Protection Act in terms of a person can go to someone who holds their data, i.e. they can come to the practice and they can ask to see all the data that you hold on them. Before giving them the data, you would check it, and you've got the two tests that you would carry out. We'll talk about them in a moment. Then you would give the patient their data. And that's the legal process that you would carry out. The online access is essentially a real-time version of that, because you now, if you're processing their data as you go along, carrying out those two tests at the same time, then what the patient is seeing online will essentially be what they would get if they put in a subject access request. And hopefully, perhaps you can see that in potentially a number of years' time, I suspect this isn't going to happen straight away, but this would be a long-term aim, I guess, to reduce the number of subject access requests you get by being able to say, well, it's there anyway. You don't need essentially to ask us for it because you got access to it. So the law, which is the subject access request, permits someone to have access to their record, subject to a couple of checks. And essentially, this is giving them that same access, but in a real-time, ongoing online process. What I would say about that, and I mentioned this on the last presentation I did, is that a subject access request is, as I said, a legal process. You have to get it right, and if you don't get it right, no, you haven't broken the law. You're in breach of the law to some extent, but don't overplay that bit. But what I'm saying is, it's a legal process that you need to be getting correct. With the online access, it's not a legal process. It's a system process that's been put in place. Therefore, what you can do, and I'd suggest this is certainly early days, you'll want to do this, is you can err on the side of caution. Because actually, if you don't put something on the online record, and and that decision not to put it on has been found to be wrong, then you just put it on. You haven't broken the law, or you haven't breached the process for subject access, because it's only essentially a records management process. It's not a legal process. Hopefully that makes some sort of sense. But there are a number of, there is a clear link between these two things here. And I think as we go further forward, I suspect it will become more and more the point that you're able to say to people, well, your information's there anyway. You don't need to be putting in this subject access request process, because we know how resource intensive they are. So potentially this could be an advantage of that. Okay. So the two checks I mentioned then that you would carry out under a subject access request, and that you're now required to carry out almost in real time for people having access to their records, are third-party data check. Now, I've got a a fact sheet on this on the IG portal, and I'll just ask Amanda if she can put the link to the IG portal in the chat for this meeting. I'm sure hopefully you're all familiar with it. You've all had you know where it is, at least as a reference point. If you go on there and look at the fact sheets, there is one in there that says that it's titled third party information, and it talks about how you do a check there. And it's important to remember that I do think some of the ones I've seen very occasionally, I think people overplay it, overthink it perhaps in terms of third party information. Remember, if the patient already knows it, you don't need essentially to redact it. And there's a little example in there, and I know it's a stupid one. It uses the Simpsons characters, and Bart Simpson goes to the doctor, and it talks about hereditary something that is, I forget the little girl's name. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. If you go on that fact sheet, it tells you in there. It talks about some of the things that you need to think about when doing a third party check, and that it's not perhaps as not perhaps as complex as some people make it. The immediate family stuff isn't always relevant. Anyway, that's in there. The other bit that's in there, and I'll mention this now, I think I was going to talk about it later on, but just because it's in my mind, and I will mention it. One of the specific queries I'd had related to staff details being available online. So as well as there is a final paragraph on that third party check fact sheet that's in there, and it talks about staff access. I've done a whole separate guidance document to go on there. Now, the only reason it isn't actually on there yet, because the guy that does our website has just been on leave because his wife just had a baby last week. He's back today, and hopefully he will be able to upload that fact sheet that talks about staff names, because it was a specific question that was raised to me on a number of occasions. I've done a bit of research. Essentially, staff names need to be left in the record. They need to be visible, because, and if we think about it from our own perspective, you need to know the names of the people that are treating you, the people that are involved in your healthcare. You have a right to know who the nurse, who the doctor is, who these people are. And then also at the practice, there's a recognition there are a lot of people at practice who aren't necessarily providing healthcare, but are doing other critical jobs in terms of the administration of the practice and the administration of healthcare, and they will have legitimate access to people's records, and that needs to be in there as well. So I've got a right to know who has been looking at my record, and who's been accessing it and what they've been doing and so on. Anyway, and that concept I've kind of expanded out and put into a full fact sheet. There are exemptions around if there's a specific threat to a member of staff that they feel just by having the name in there and the patient seeing that may cause them a very specific threat, then there are exemptions built into the system. So, but they're the exception rather than the rule. The general rule is that staff names need to be left in the record. And actually, that hasn't changed with this. That's as it is now. That applies to subject access requests now. This new system doesn't change the law, so that bit around staff names being in there isn't changed at all. I could have written this guide 6 months ago before this was even being talked about, and it would apply to the subject access requests. So yeah, so that fact sheet will be there, say hopefully later on today, and it comes as part of that third party check. This is the other test that people need to think about clearly. Serious harm is what it says. It's serious. The bar on serious harm is quite high. Clearly, it doesn't relate to physical issues. It's going to be around mental health here, and I think it's appreciated and acknowledged that mental health is going to be a challenging area for this. But when you do that serious harm test, it's worth, again, there's a fact sheet purely on that. It's worth having a look at it. It's worth ensuring that you realize how high that bar is set. Having said that, I think this is one of the areas where, as I mentioned earlier on, you can probably err on the side of caution. Whereas if you think something probably shouldn't be on there, then perhaps don't put it on, but perhaps ask for someone else to check, or have a conversation with someone, as opposed to a subject access request where you've got to make an actual decision because that's a legal process. With this, you could think, okay, that doesn't quite sound right. I think we'll just play safe and not show this. That's kind of my thought around that. But do have some thought around that. Remember, serious harm isn't around, well, this is a bit awkward, this is a bit embarrassing. It is serious harm to the individual or any other person. Okay. Yeah, and one of the other issues that I've kind of already mentioned is I wouldn't say it's a failure of the system. The system hasn't worked out yet, and I'm told there is work underway as to how it's going to deal with this, where patients transfer from one practice to another. So this is going to become more of a problem actually as we go on. So at the moment, patients will have access to their record, and if it's one of your patients if you've been seeing them in the last month, they'll be able to see the interactions that they've had with your practice. They'll be thinking, wow, this is great, I like this system. They then go and move to a new practice and they lose that history. Essentially, the system will start again and they will only have access to the new data that gets added on at their new practice, because the data that you've added on at the old practice is now classed as historical data and they don't have access to that. So there is still clearly work to be done, because that's not ideal to give someone access and then take it away just because they happen to move practice. Now, clearly at the new practice, they could ask to have access to that historical data, and that process will still be available as it is now to all your patients to ask to have that. But they lose that that link to the previous data when they move practices. They start off with essentially a blank system again. But as I said, there is some work still going on that, and hopefully they'll come up with some sort of solution for it. Okay. These are the issues that have come up. We've actually mentioned a few of them already. These are the significant issues, I think, for which there's an awful lot of guidance on the NHS digital web pages. I would say, having been involved in quite a number of various different projects, not unlike this, but different ones, the amount of guidance and the amount of good stuff that's available is as good as I've ever seen. I think it really has, and I guess that's a result of the two pauses we had. I mean, as you may well remember, this was due to go live originally in April, and then in September, and now it's gone live. They've used those two opportunities where there was a delay to really get some good guidance out there. And it's not just documentation. Some of the little videos where you've got doctors, people who on some of the pilot sites who went live earlier, who talk about all of these issues and who give you real-time solutions to them, including, look at the system. If you're an EMIS system, you click that button and this happens. So it's really good stuff. And I would advise you, I'm not going to be able to cover off all these issues in any meaningful way now. I'd advise you to look at that stuff. It's not also just NHS Digital. There are lots of links to the BMA's guidance, which is very good, and to some of the other mental health charities have been involved. So there's a whole range of stuff on there. So all I'm going to do really is highlight some of these concerns. If you still feel that you have concerns, and if these are issues that you're not yet comfortable with, have a look at the in-depth guidance that's on there, because it really is very good. So the issues that I think are predominantly still live, and will be still live anyway because of the nature of the system, these aren't things that we can fix. These are things that people just need to be aware of, because they're inherent in the way that the system is going to operate. Safeguarding issues are clearly going to be highlighted. You need to be very careful about information that's put on and information that's redacted and not made visible. The issue around coercion and individuals who are in partnerships or potentially in a family setting where they are being coerced into showing what may be on their app and the access that they may have. That is a major concern. I think I would guess that the guys who create the system would say that that they can't solve the problems within relationships. They are what they are, and coercion will exist around a range of situations. This is going to be one. One of the things that has been done that I saw on one of the little videos, which I thought was really useful. This concept of a ghost appointment. So if someone in a relationship goes to see their GP around, shall we say, domestic violence, if they know clearly that when they go back to their partner, that partner is going to coerce them into showing the appointment details on their app, there are a number of things you can do. First of all, you may be in a position where you would not give them access to their data anyway. But if you did, you could create an appointment that said, rather than saying the patient came for an appointment around domestic violence, you could create it as something different. Let's say, can't sleep or something like that, but the real bit still sits behind it. And like I say, there's a video on how to actually do this on the system, which is really quite useful, because I think of all the things, that is still a concern. But I think it's one that probably applies in lots of other areas anyway. It would apply to a subject access request where you would have no idea whether there was coercion involved or not. So it's one of those where it's always difficult for you to sort out, because you don't know whether this is happening or not, and you can just go with, I guess, with what the patients are telling you to a large extent. So we mentioned third-party data and the serious harm test as well. And then the way to deal with these, and the basic concept, is to redact certain types of information and not make them visible online, so they still sit in the record. And it's important that we ensure that our medical records are still the full comprehensive record that we'd want them to be for you guys in terms of providing healthcare to patients. We can't be not putting stuff in there because it's for fear of it being made visible. So we have to ensure that the processes we have for redacting it and not making it visible on the online system are in place. Okay, so they're probably the big issues that I think people need to be very aware of. Right. So what I said I'd do at the start of this presentation is run through. This is a checklist which NHS Digital have produced. If you want the actual document itself, I've kind of cut and pasted it up into here, into this presentation, so we can run through it in a logical sequence. If you want the document itself, I'll ask Amanda to post in the chat forum a link to the last presentation I did. It's a blog post that I did after I did this last presentation about a month ago. So you can go to that presentation itself, but also there's a link to this check sheet on there as well. So you can get the actual document itself. That's it. And this presentation also will be on that portal later on today as well. So I'll just quickly run through the stuff on here, and really this is just a check to say, have you done this? Have you thought about this? So it talks about reviewing, updating clinical organizational settings. So I was a bit frustrated with this one, because I remember going back in April when this first came out and we first started talking about it, and being absolutely assured that there'd be no need for any local configuration, that system suppliers would just do it and it would just be all sorted and done, and you didn't need to worry about any of it. And then I forget when it was, only a few months ago, someone sent around this list and said, okay, these are the practices that are ready and these ones need to do some work. What? So anyway, there's a link on there to the GP Online system configuration. We got that list. As far as I was aware, our support teams, we had someone who was ringing around, essentially making sure that you were up to date. So your system should all be up to date, but you can check by having a look on that. If you follow that link that's on there, it'll tell you what you need to check for. It's one of the system settings that needs to be. But as far as I'm aware, I think in this area, everyone's up and online with that. Review new and current policies to ensure they reflect patients being able to see their prospective records. If you have policies and processes that describe to staff how they deal with information. In terms of patients being aware of it, I think you may want to put together a short paragraph to add to your privacy notice to say that, in line with contractual requirements, you'll be giving patients online access, or patients will have it. They can set up the NHS app themselves and they will get online access to their records. This one's clearly very important. Ensuring processes are in place so that harmful and confidential third-party information is redacted as it is being entered. And then there are 2 guidance there documents for the TPP system 1 or the EMIS web. So links to how you do this. This is the how to actually do this to ensure that this data that you don't want the patient to see gets redacted from their online view. This is the bit that I suspect you should all have done already, reviewing patients who may be at risk of serious harm by having access to their records. And there's a toolkit there from Royal College of GPs, and then it's about running certain codes, certain reports that you can run, and then you can apply. So yeah, you run a report, and then you can apply these codes, the SNOMED codes, which will prevent access being applied to certain patients, so depending on their clinical need. I think when you run these reports. You think about a process for young people who will have access at 16 and may have safeguarding needs. Again, there's a link there about children and young people's guidance to online services. Ensure processes are in place to manage patient requests to amend or change information. This is the one which I'm sure you're all sat there thinking, no. I think it's recognized that this is going to cause a resource issue for you. And I think early days, remember, it's only data that's been added on now going forward. This isn't the whole history, but I think the reality is you're going to get occasionally from patients, and possibly, well, across the spectrum, I think potentially, but also you probably know there'll be a cohort of patients who probably already interact with the practice, shall we say, more than the majority, more than the average, and that they will be reading their records, they'll be looking at this, and they will be either genuinely asking a question to say, I don't understand this, what does this mean, or essentially challenging what's been put on there. So how you want to do that is up to you. Whether, if you think this is going to be a real resource issue, I mean, I heard someone saying you could have it as an extra option on your phone system. If you have a phone system that says, press 1 if you want an appointment, press 2 repeat meds, press 3 if you have a query around your medical record that from having looked online at it, that then could go to a recording where it says, okay, please tell us what the issue is and we'll look into it. Something along those. I don't know. There may be different ways of thinking about this. You may want to set up an email account for people to specifically do that. You may all take the view that actually, do you know what, we're probably not going to get that many, and we will just manage them in terms of our normal processes. If someone rings up and says, I want to change it, you'll presumably want them to put it in writing, send an email to say, what is it you want changing? Why do you want to change? Why do you think it's incorrect? And there will occasionally be an error gets made. We're all human. You guys, clinicians are all human. You occasionally make an error. I don't know. In Barry's very simplistic clinical world, let's say I put right knee instead of left knee. I go and have a look at my record. I went to see my doctor last week, so I've got this pain in my right knee, and on my system online it says, oh, it's pain in his left knee. Do you know what? I'm just going to contact the practice. I'll send them an email or whatever. I'll contact them and say there's an error there. It just needs to be corrected, and hopefully that'll get done. When you're getting into people who are challenging a diagnosis and they don't agree with what's being said, you're into a whole different process there, and you need to ensure that you've got something in place to do that. And of course, patients have got the right to do that. They may well challenge things. They don't have the right to have a clinical opinion changed, but they do have the right to say, put their view across. So you may want to, okay, I'll add the fact that the patient doesn't agree with this. That's I think there's nothing wrong with doing that, but you should have some sort of process in place. Who's going to do that? Who's going to manage that? Who's going to authorize something like that going onto the record? Ensure information is clear, accurate, and legible in the patient record. Okay, I'm not getting into that one. I don't think clinicians or anyone who writes who records information in a clinical record clearly needs to be doing that anyway, and I'm sure you are. I'm sure that's not an issue. Review learnings from some practices that have already successfully implemented this change. Yep, there's some early adopter stuff on there. There were a couple of little videos from GPs who said, one in particular has been doing this for a number of years, and a couple of others who talked about some of the odd issues that they come across. But really, if you've got a few minutes, well worth having a listen to some of those from the early adopter sites. And at the very bottom there, it says, see how to set up a test patient, which is what I was mentioning before. I think that's a really useful thing to do. And the instructions, again, by following that link there, will take you to that. And you can see how it looks like from the patient's viewpoint. Okay, this is clearly absolutely critical that staff know about this. As it says on there, training for them, including locums, on how to redact, how to identify at-risk patients and removing access when necessary, and how to write notes that are suitable for the patient view. So there's loads of stuff on there, but clearly all your staff who potentially enter data into a clinical system need to be fully aware of this. Ensure staff are familiar with any changes to the registration processes of new patients, how to identify potentially at-risk patients. This comes under that bit I was talking about before around patients transferring. As I understand it at the moment, if a patient hasn't been granted access at a practice for a good reason, that they've worked through it, and okay, for this reason you're not suitable, it's not suitable for you to have online access. When that patient transfers to a new practice, it's not clear how much of that historical information they would see to be able to make that decision, or even if that decision will be transferred with the record. I think there was a question that came up on one of the meetings the other week about would that decision that had been recorded to not give the patient access, would it be how would it be visible to the new practice when they get that record, and can they just immediately ensure that it's not available again by default, that the system doesn't, the default position is that it stays the same when it gets transferred, and there's still a slight question around that. But the registration of new patients clearly is something that needs to be looked at and checked as they come in to make sure that it's, I guess that's a case of looking at their historical record and seeing if they're suitable for it. And it says, encourage practice staff to attend or watch the recordings of the General Practice Awareness webinar. Yeah, so the stuff that's on there, the link to the bottom there, I think, are to the NHS England ones. And if any of you have been on the NHS England webinars, again, I think they're fairly good. They're still running them, and they still are running them even after the 30th of November. They're going all, when I looked on the calendar, they're all the way through into December. And I suspect potentially for some while yet, until everybody's comfortable with this. So those online webinars directly from NHS England, they're worth having a look at. And you can record them, you can see, you can view previous ones. They tend to be much of a muchness, to be honest, but if you look at one of the more recent ones, they will have answered the sort of questions, some of the ones that I've had, some of the ones about transferring data. I need to go and look at probably one of the more recent ones now to see if they've come up with a solution to that issue around how patient data gets transferred. But yeah, they're certainly worth having a look at. Okay. Yeah, and again, this is just about staff awareness, really. It says appoint an online services champion lead. I suspect practice managers, that's probably a job that's coming your way. I know it may be useful if you have someone, certainly in large practices, you may want to give this as a little task to someone, just to go around and make sure that everyone is familiar, pick up any questions, and just be aware of how you're going to think about issues. And there's an FAQ on there as well that might be useful. So yeah, certainly in a large practice, it might be useful giving this little job to someone, just to go around and ensure that everyone's fully aware, pick up any questions, bring them back, talk about them, discuss them at team meetings and all that sort of stuff. As it says there, discuss with your team the benefits record access could have for practice and patients. Yeah, I think this is important. I'm sure that you're all sat listening to this now, and you're looking at, you're thinking about the resource implications, you're thinking about what could go wrong, all of the safeguarding stuff. And I don't mean to say negative, but that is, kind of where a lot of your thoughts will be going, because it is a big deal. However, have a look at these benefits as well. There are benefits to this. There are potential things that can that may improve and free up your time. As it says, the patient benefits there. It is better that patients have more knowledge, that feeling of autonomy, potentially. And so again, I'll come back to it. Some of those little videos about patients with long-term conditions who can access and can manage their own conditions and have a better understanding of it. They do really well, and many patients think it, really do thrive on it and really do well. Yeah, and just being able to review up-to-date information and so on at any time of the day is I think, is a good thing. Staff benefits, yes, it says there will be an initial rise in new inquiries as patients become familiar with it. But long term, you would hope it would reduce workload, reducing emails and so on. It is going to be, and I do suspect that you will get an increase in calls in the initial sort of first few weeks, months, and certainly as people become more aware of it, it's not going to be, as I said, it's not a big bang. This is happening, and all bells and whistles and balloons, and a massive publicity splurge about it. It's coming in slightly under the radar, slightly low key. It's there now. It's been there for a couple of weeks. People will start to become aware of it, and you will get, I suspect, an increase in calls, but over time, hopefully that will reduce to a manageable level, and you'll see benefits as well from it. As it says there, although you are required to consider the potential impact of every entry, it's expected that the long-term benefits will outweigh any increase in workload. Okay, that's a bit, yeah. And I think that's almost it. Yeah, well, that's all about being promoted prior to the 1st of November, making people aware of it. There are some communication things that are there. There will be, as well as the downside of you also thinking, oh my God, there's going to be these patients who we know are our cohort of challenging patients who will be using this. There are an awful lot of your patients out there who will think this is great, who will embrace it, who will really think this is just good. It's just a good thing to do. And I include myself in that. I think this is a great thing to do. I've looked at, I've got my app ready, and the majority of people, probably your silent majority of patients, are the ones who will think this is good. And so if you can look at that, and have a look at the ones who may actively benefit from it, the ones who are potentially in long-term conditions, who can be more aware of their conditions and of how they're being monitored and what's happening. So it's all on there. As I said, that bit at the bottom, when you see this document itself, obviously you've got the links themselves that you can follow, and they are very good, as I said. I think the 2 pauses we've had in the overall program have allowed people to get their heads together and to really produce some good guidance and documentation around it. Okay, any questions then? So that's the link to the to all the guidance and stuff that's on there. Although if you search NHS Digital for online access, it'll take you to that page pretty much. And that checklist itself is that document there. To say is embedded in this presentation, which will be online, but then you've got the online link as well, which Amanda will have put up for us. So I think that's probably it.
We just had a couple of questions pop up in the chat, Barry, just about one from Nicola. What code should we be using for patients at risk of serious harm? So she mentioned there she's added the SNOMED codes, but can still see information on the test patient.
Okay. I mean, I don't, if I'm honest, I don't know the specific codes for this. Other than I would say they're in the guidance document. There's on that main guidance page near the bottom, there are sections that, if I remember rightly, there's like 5 or 6 different sections. One's for patients, one's for commissioners, and there's a section that says this is all for the GP, what the practice need to know. And if you click on that one, it takes you into documents or links that cover the specifics around what you need to do in certain situations. So I'm afraid I don't know the exact codes as such, but I'm sure they're in there.
Okay, no problem. And I think that might also answer, I had a question from Claire as well, which code do we add to the patient record after the go live date to restrict online access? So would we refer Claire to the same document there.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. Yeah, I'm just reading that, Claire. Sorry, I don't have the actual codes that you need, but having read through it, I seem to recall I've seen them that they are written in that documentation. But I can't actually help you with the actual codes themselves. What I'll do, I'll find out and I'll put the link. I'll write a little blog thing later on, and I'll put the links in there. But I'm sure you guys would be able to find them anyway. They're on that guidance page under the bit that says what GP practices need to know, I think.
I think that is it for questions in the chat.
Okay. Does anyone have any burning questions or anything they feel I haven't covered, or anything that they feel I could help with, basically? Okay, well, thank you all for coming along. If you do, as hopefully you all know, if you do have any queries at all, please get back to me. Just drop me an email, and I'll try and help out. This presentation and the webinar will be online hopefully later today. As I said, I'm sure Amanda's already put in the chat. There's a link to that practice checklist, which is there now. You can have a look at that. And I think the main thing is to get your staff awareness, I think, would be my thought as being one of the most almost critical things that you need to think about. Richard, someone just put that, was it Richard put his hand up?
Yeah, sorry, it was a late one.
Oh, okay.
It's only a quick one. It's really to get ideas from other people on the call of any of the software that you can use to screen the records for third-party data and safeguarding information.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone wants to speak up, I know that a number of practices use the IGPR. Is that right? I think that's right. Does it do automatic screening then? I know it screens when you ask it for a subject access request. Are you saying that it will do an automatic screening before stuff goes online? Is that? Has anyone used it?
I think we've used IGPR to support with the subject access requests, and it certainly helps to identify names and certain terms. So I think it makes the process easier. And I'm just wondering if that, because obviously if stuff is, as patients register, we're going to have to check their records at the point they register. So my thoughts were, if there's software that we could use to support that, that might make life a bit easier.
Yeah, as I say, I know some practices use it, and I'm pretty sure some swear by it. I've spoken to a few people. I've not actually seen it myself. If anyone, well, I'll probably leave it. If anyone does use IGPR, I'm happy to get in touch directly with Richard and perhaps tell him and answer his question there. If anyone uses it and would be willing to drop me a direct message after this and just tell me what you think about it, I'll pass it on to everyone else, and I'm happy to do that anonymously. I know people don't always want to say, yeah, it's brilliant, or yeah, this is rubbish, or whatever. But if you want to let me know directly, I'm happy to kind of anonymize that and put it around saying, hey, I understand that this is great, or this doesn't work so well, or this. And if you got any others, I forget, there was a name of another company that I heard did it as well, but I similar type products anyway. But I'm happy to put together a little guidance around that if people want to contact me directly. Shiny, you've got your hand up. Was there something you want to add?
Yeah, this is regarding, in the beginning you mentioned that if an entry is made from out of hours, because it's a different system one user, patients won't be able to see the data. So I just wondered whether it will be the same with the safeguarding team.
So my understanding is, if it's entered into a different System 1 unit, then it's not going to be visible to the patient. Literally, the patient is only going to see data that's entered into the GP practice unit. And like I say, this did come up with the out of hours unit, and I don't know how the System 1, how the safeguarding unit works, and also it only works in certain areas, isn't it? I'm thinking it's only North East Links that have. I know there's one area that I think it might be East Riding that doesn't have it set up through System 1. But yeah, that's my understanding, that it is only data that's in the GP unit as such that's visible.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, everyone. As I said, please just shout. Get in touch with me if you've got any queries. Anything you don't want to shout out here, absolutely fine. If you've got anything around IGPR, anything like that you'd like to tell me about, and I can share with everyone else, that would be great. But if not, we'll probably try to do another one of these just before 30th. And see, sorry, there's a message just popped up there and it's disappeared again. Let me see if I can just find Vicky. Consider the registration. Yeah, Vicky, I think that's a very good comment. I've also, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to try and look into this, because I've also seen that just this week NHS Digital are now promoting this online registration process. I don't know if you've seen that. It looks great, because we have had a lot of problems with registration, and when they go wrong, they can go wrong, and then they can go really badly wrong, and cause us a lot of problems. So this online registration did look like it could be a good process in terms of ensuring that we don't get silly errors where names are recorded wrongly because the patient's actually doing most of it themselves. Just thinking through, I would hope that there's actually, if you're doing it online, it could actually work better. Than there could be a system whereby you have to do something before that becomes visible to the patient. So as you're doing the registration process, when it gets to the practice bit, when they do theirs, that you have to do that check, and therefore it doesn't become automatically visible before the practice has reviewed it and said, yes, okay, it can be visible. Which I think is kind of what you're saying. You wouldn't want a patient to move across and then be given online access, because they may move to you and they may have an appointment with a GP within the first couple of days before you've had a chance to look at that registration and to see whether it's suitable for them to have online or not. Best will in the world, you may not be doing this on a real-time day-to-day basis. So I think it would be useful if that process has that built into it. So I'm going to have I'll have a look at that. I'll take that away, Vicky, and see if I can find if that's actually developed into the new system. Okay. Thank you all for coming along this morning. Good luck and best wishes when this goes. If you haven't gone live yet and you're going on the 30th of November, I'm sure it'll be straightforward, and I'm sure we'll have some bumps along the way. But yeah, give me a shout if you get any problems at all, and anything I get, I'll put onto the IG portal in the next few days. Okay, thank you all very much. Have a great day. Thank you.